to tell you the two prernas that impacted me and are behind my story. So my grandfather, I was his oldest grandson. So he was very keen he should impart in me his wisdom that he had. And, instead of teaching me religious rituals, he said, look, rituals are important, but more important than that is learning Gita. And he said, more important than learning Gita is actually to learn the Vedas, the Upanishads. And he instilled very early on this idea of going to first principles. So when I was doing my engineering, I stumbled into something which seemed to me like the Veda of software. You know what Veda of software can be? How many of you have an Android phone here? All right. So you have an app. App is the bhajan. The bhajan is based on the operating system. Behind the operating system or below the operating system is something called the Linux kernel. Has anybody heard of the Linux kernel? Right? Some of you have. So Linux kernel is the Veda of the bhajan, that part that you're talking about here, which is your app. If you don't have the Linux kernel, you don't have the Android. If you don't have Android, you won't have the app. Are you with me? Yes. By the way, this is true. This is Google doing it. Linux kernel is made by volunteers, by the way. Does anybody here use a Macintosh? A MacBook? No? But if you do, I see some hands going up. If you do, if you use an app on Mac, that is the bhajan. The Macintosh operating system, Mac OS, is the equivalent of Android. But you know what's below that? Something called Unix kernel. Unix, Linux. Sound familiar? So I was doing my engineering 82 to 86, training to become a regular engineer. Along the way, I picked upon Unix, because Unix had been given away by this company called AT&T Bell Labs to the universities. It had made its way to almost all universities in the world. And you remember, I couldn't process it then. It took me many more years to figure out that this was happening. And I can now see that at that time, it occurred to me that this is the Veda part of software. So I became a Unix kernel engineer as a volunteer Unix kernel engineer. It was not my job. I never got paid for it. And since I did it out of passion, some of my Unix kernel code ended up being in Unix. And I still like to believe, I use a MacBook too, and some of the others that you use it too. I like to believe that even 30 years later, some of my code is still running in that machine. Right? Now, so that's what happened. And that set me on to a journey of a different kind. So that was prerna number one. The second prerna is related, in a way related to what we do here. And that comes from a person called Vannevar Bush. You mentioned MIT very proudly, one of the premier universities in the US, especially in the area of science and technology. Vannevar Bush was the dean of engineering of MIT way back in the 1940s. So when World War ended, by the way, he was a very prolific man, very talented. He was also the co-founder of a company called Raytheon, which is still around. And but when the World War ended, in July of 1945, he wrote a memo. The name of the memo tells you what it is about. Science, the Endless Frontier. So he made an argument, as the world sets upon rebuilding itself, either because of the war, or as was anticipated, that colonies will be freed, and countries like India and so many other colonies will sit down and commence this task of building their nation. He said that science is going to be the fundamental part that will enable it to happen. So his memo, which is worth reading, is called Science, the Endless Frontier. And that, he said, look, I can't commit other nations to this strategy, but I can commit US to this strategy. So he wrote the memo in July of 1945, and in July of 1946, US formally embraced that strategy as its key strategy. In fact, in 2021, not surprisingly, anchored in MIT, they celebrated the 75 years of the Vanavar Bush strategy. And so the science and technology hub that you see in the US, it comes from this one dream, one memo from one person. That is something that we still have to replicate in India. So with this little bit of a setup, let me take you on a journey which is all but 10 years old. Now, how did it, what kind of led to this journey? So what happened is, just to get back to my story, remember I told you I got into Unix kernel. Unix was owned, although it had been given away, the Unix labs was owned by AT&T Bell Labs. Long story short, I ended up being hired by AT&T, and here I was in AT&T Bell Labs. And then there was something special happening in India. So my first stint in Bangalore was 93 to 97 to set up AT&T's R&D there. And this is the time when many other R&D centers were coming up, MNC R&D centers, right? Oracle came up at that time. There was, of course, TI had come up a little earlier, Texas Instruments in 1985, but there were dozens and dozens of US companies that came to establish their R&D centers in India. All this happened in the early 90s, in the 90s. Now, if you fast forward a little bit, 20 years later, there were many people in those R&D centers who had become frustrated. You know why? They said, we're building this cool technology for our parent company in the US. What are we doing for India? Yeah. Right? So a dream took shape. The dream that took shape was a dream to do with Rajni. This lady that you see is a real street vendor, although we don't use her real name. So the dream was very simple. What happens is, even today, Rajni goes to a money lender in the morning, takes a loan of 400, 500 rupees, buys something wholesale, sets up a stall, sells whatever she can during the day, and at the end of the day, she pays back the loan. And this daily loan cycle repeats itself again and again. The interest rate is minimum 1%, depending on where you are and what season it is. It could be up to 2% or even higher. So effectively, she is paying 300% plus on that loan. So it's a very expensive loan. 1% a day is quite expensive, right? And so the dream was very simple. Can we bring her into the formal system? And she should be able to as conveniently obtain a loan, but maybe at 30% instead of 300%. And have the protections of a formal loan, because if you don't repay an informal loan, then bad things happen to you. You know that, right? So you have the protections that are available for a formal loan. Now, the only way she could get a formal loan from an NBFC or a bank is if there was a KYC done. Do you know how much a KYC cost in 2013? 50 to 60 rupees. Because you had to have a paper KYC. If you went back to that time and you wanted a SIM, you needed to give paper proof, 2 IDs, and this, that, and the other. They had to photocopy, they had to send it over. It's a complicated process. And that paperwork used to cost between 50 to 60 rupees. So nobody wanted to serve Rajni, because if you had to spend 50, 60 rupees on her to give her a loan, this is not going to be viable anyway. So a group of people created eKYC. Do you know what eKYC is? Has anybody here obtained a Geo SIM? Right? When you obtained, you first put your thumbprint, said, okay, I'm Sharad. The second time you put the thumbprint is to say, 4 pieces of information, name, address, age, and gender. Please send it to this mobile operator as part of my Know Your Customer. Right? And boom, your KYC is done. How much does it cost? 2 rupees. So KYC was actually created for Rajni. But who used it? It was used by Jan Dhan to give bank accounts to everybody in India. It was used by Jio to onboard 1 million customers a day for 200 days and get to 200 million customers in less than a year. But it was actually created originally for Rajni. Now Rajni has a eKYC. She decides to take a loan from a NBFC or a bank. She has to sign it. How does she sign it? So e-sign was created. Have you used e-sign? Now many of you use it for filing taxes. India is the largest user of digital signatures in the world. We in India do more digital signatures than 3 times more digital signatures than the US does on any particular day. But it was actually created for Rajni. Third, I have a loan agreement. Where do I keep it? Rajni doesn't know how to use Google Drive. In fact, Google Drive was not available in 2020. She doesn't know where to keep her agreement. How many of you use DigiLocker? Please thank Rajni for it. Now, you needed to send 400, 500 rupees to her bank account and take it back in the evening. The only way to do it in 2013, 2014 was to do it with a debit card. The problem with the debit card was that they charged 1% for any transaction, either going in or going out. So they were going to charge 2%. We said, look, how can we give you 2% Visa and MasterCard? We are trying to disintermediate a money lender who charges 1%. They said, yeah, we understand. We can solve this problem. Don't worry. We will only charge you half what we charge. So instead of 2% a day, we charge 1%. So we thought really hard. And we said, what's the point of taking 1% away from a local money lender and giving it to a foreign company? Do you think it makes sense? So, UPI was created for Rajni. How many here don't use UPI? Because it's pointless asking who uses UPI. So today, we will do more payment transactions, digital payment transactions. I'm going to start with China and go west. China, Korea, all of Middle East, France, UK, and all of US put together. Just put your mind around it. We will do more transactions than China, Korea, Middle East, France, UK, and US put together. Right? And UPI was launched only in August of 2016, so it's not a very old payment system. And we are roughly about 14 to 18 months away when we will do more transactions on UPI in India than MasterCard, born in 1958, does worldwide. Right? So you can see this is a transformation, right? Now this is not finished. Now Rajni can at least get a loan. Now what is still remaining is, if there are 2 Rajnis, one pays back on time and one doesn't pay back on time, don't you think the Rajni that pays back on time should get a cheaper loan than the one who doesn't pay back on time? Right? Do you think the bank will automatically give her a cheaper loan? No, they'll give her a cheaper loan, or NBFC will give her a cheaper loan only if she says, if you don't give me a cheaper loan, I'll go to this other NBFC or bank. Don't you do that with your home loans? Why should Rajni not be able to do that? So she should be able to carry her data that indicated what her history has been, to any other NBFC or bank to be able to do that. That system is called the account aggregator. Anybody has heard of it? Yeah. Okay. And that system is the newest system. It was launched in September 2021. All banks are connected to it. There are about 5 million transactions that have been done. It is growing at 52% month on month. In every month, we do 52% more transactions than the previous month. So it's coming your way. If you are here next year, many of you would have already used it. Because UPI also, it wasn't meant for people in Bangalore. You know who it was meant for? People in Aravali district. Because Rajasthan was very good at giving money on DBT. Right? Aravali district is the poorest district of Rajasthan around Udaipur. Very few banks there. So if you now got money in your bank account at that time, you needed to take the money out to be able to spend it. So that's called cash out. Who would do the cash out for you? The business correspondent. The business correspondent will ask you to sign a withdrawal slip and then go to the bank, and the bank teller will say, yes sir, ये तो signature match नहीं होता. आप मुझे इसका 2% दे दो, मैं इसको match करा देता हूँ signature. You know what I'm talking about? So in Aravali district, the cash out ratio was 11%. It meant that if you gave 100 rupees to this business correspondent, he gave you back only 89 rupees. So the first adopters of UPI were actually that district in Rajasthan. Because now what this business correspondent did, he said, madam, aap ye sirf paisa mere bank account mein transfer kar do. Now he goes to the bank and says, I want to withdraw money. Now the teller cannot say your signature does not tally. It was not legal, but this was a workable workaround. And in Niti Aayog did camps called cashless camps in every district of India, several times in many districts, in the bigger districts, to teach the business correspondents to use this act to solve the cash out problem that is there. That is where UPI actually took root. How many of you have credit cards? You didn't need UPI, right? It is people who didn't have a credit card who needed a UPI. Now what is remaining is that the Rajini should not be able to take the loan from two places on the same day. Because she is after all going to sell only a limited amount of money. She goes to bank A and says, "Mujhe 400 rupees de do." Then she goes to the bank B and says, "Aap bhi mujhe 400 rupees de do." Then at the end of the day, she can only pay 400 rupees back, really speaking, because that's how the nature of the business is. So to prevent this double lending, there is a piece that remains to be built. It's called the Public Credit Registry, which has been accepted and announced. In this budget, there was a lot of focus on it. You may remember, called National Financial Inclusion Registry. So that's coming. Once that comes, Rajini will come to life. So this dream is partially complete, not fully complete. Are you with me so far? Yeah. So in the process, however, what we ended up creating is this idea of this idea of India Stack. We said in India, we must therefore create these building blocks that mediate the flow of people, which is eKYC. Why do you need flow of people? People move from one organization. You want to know who is this person, right? Is it the same Sharad that went to that bank and is now coming to me, and or is it a different Sharad? Second is flow of money, which is UPI, and flow of information, as you know, which is the account aggregator. Now, the value of this is that it can lead to inclusion. Jan Dhan, I gave you that example. But it can also make other types of efficiency come in even in the government system. So let me tell you the COVID story. May I tell you the COVID story? Right? So now in 2021, it is quite clear that we need to vaccinate 1 billion people. Are you with me? Yes. Now, till then, what were we doing? We were vaccinating 25 million babies a year, because India has roughly about 25 million children that are born, and they all need to be vaccinated. So they would be vaccinated from these vaccination hubs or vaccination centers. They would vary from 32,000 to 40,000 depending on the season, right? Because babies are not born uniformly, some are born more in some months than other months. And so let's say 40,000 vaccination centers. If 40,000 vaccination centers vaccinate 25 million people, then how many vaccination centers we need to vaccinate 1 billion people? Billion is 40 times that of 25, right? So what would you answer? 40 times, 30 times, 20 times, 10 times, or 1 time? No additional need. What do you think should be the answer? How many of you say 40 times? How many of you say 30 times? How many of you say 20 times? 10 times. You're not voting for this is no Tama. So how many of you say only we can do with 40,000 centers alone? Right? I see one hand going up. So this is a meeting that is taking place. Because iSpirit built the health stack, I am also part of this meeting. Generally speaking, all the people there are discussing amongst themselves 20 times, 30 times, 40 times. That is what the argument is. So people like me are saying we don't need anything extra. They really think we are crazy. Right? Because in their mind, if we do 25 million in a year, how can we do 1 billion from the same center in a year? But you know why that worked? We actually did not add more vaccination centers. And why, thankfully, I'm very grateful that it worked, is because you could reimagine the flow of people, money, and information. Is there anybody here who got a vaccination without their Aadhaar card? Aadhaar number tracked you into that system. Are you yes or no? Yes. Did that have to be invented? No, it already existed. Did anybody get a paper vaccination certificate? No, electronic. Why? Because the DigiLocker already existed. Because of Rajini, right? No other country had it. So, the vaccination centers, amongst the 40,000 vaccination centers, most were government, but not all are government. The ones that were private were very hesitant to do it because the government never pays them on time. So the decision was that you will be paid in the night for the previous day before you open the next day. And this happened. It didn't happen perfectly, but it happened well enough for no major complaints to come and the issues to be sorted out. So we were able to vaccinate 20, there was not a single week when India did not vaccinate 25 million people, which means 52 times productivity. What we were doing in a year, we were now doing in a week. And there were 2 days when we were able to vaccinate 25 million people on a single day. That is the magic of being able to create these building blocks and then use them in ways that you can, in weeks, construct a new bhajan, and that bhajan is very popular with the population. Are you with me? COVID was a bhajan. Now what is happening is, okay, government can change. Can we change how our market players operate? Can we create an open network for commerce? You may be hearing of ONDC. Can we create an open network for credit? That's called Open Credit Enablement Network. Can we create an open network for health? Why do we need to create that? I'll tell you in a minute. And that is health. Is anybody here from Kerala? Nobody from Kerala? All right. If I would give you a hats off because Kerala spends most, both out of pocket and the Kerala state government spends most on health. But there is a problem. Kerala is also a district that has 94% cesarean births. Kochi till recently had 56% cesarean births. Kerala as a state has more cesarean births than any other state except for one state which is equally corrupted in that way. It's called J&K. Now, this is not good use of that extra money. Cesarean births should be roughly in the 12% range. So when you do 50% cesarean births, that's neither good for the child, nor good for the mother, nor is it good for public health. Why is it happening? Because that money is going to greedy people in the health system. Are you with me? So therefore, you need a better network, better health system to control this. And technology can help make that happen. So therefore, open network for Open Health Services Network, also called UHI. So this is the big change that is happening in India. Now, why has this become significant in the world? This has become significant in the world because this way of thinking about digital public infrastructure, India is not copying anybody. India is the leader today of this. This is India's way of thinking about digital infrastructure that the world wishes to copy. And therefore, when we had a G20, when India announced that in G20 what our focus areas would be, digital public infrastructure was there. UN had its first General Assembly session in September last year on digital public infrastructure. This year, before the budget, there is an economic survey that is presented by the Chief Economic Advisor. In the economic survey, what does he say? India's digital public infrastructure will add 100 basis points, which means 1% to India's growth. So if India wants to grow at 6%, it will now grow at 7%. Now, India is not the only one who wants it. As I said, the world wants it. So not far from here, in IIIT Bangalore, there is a newer version of Aadhaar. We haven't actually used it back in India, but we're using it for other countries. So every Filipino, every Sri Lankan, every Moroccan, there are 10 countries, when they get their national identity, their equivalent of an Aadhaar, it's actually a gift from India, from MOSIP, called Modular Open Software for ID Program. And now 84 million people are using it. We'll hit about 500 million in 18 months, 1 billion another 18 months later. Just the way we export yoga, Bollywood songs, right? They improve our power, soft power in the world. We are exporting our digital public goods for free. We're not charging them. Like we give our yoga and say, please, it's a gift to you. Why do we do that? Because when Beethoven has a new symphony, he had copyright on that symphony. You remember recently a new rag has been created? Does anybody know about that? Right? Who owns that rag? You and I own that rag. Because in the Indian system, all our classical music is a public good right from day one. Our sculptures are public good. If you ever happen to go to London, please do go to London Museum. Because they have the best collection of Indian art. I'm not joking. But when you enter that section, it's a very big section, 2 floors. And when you enter that section, they can't say we have the best collection of Indian art, because if they say that, people will say, Sale colonists, wapis karo. So they have to write something else. So what do they write? They say this is the world's largest collection of copyleft art. You know what copyright is? This is copyleft art. Because India has had a long tradition of using our cultural artifacts as public goods. We are just building on that and now becoming a nation that can give to the world digital public infrastructure in that same spirit that we have talked about in the past. Are you with me? Yes. Okay. So now I just want to end with this story. And then maybe I'll go back to my first slide, which has the 3 things there. That look, as you heard already today in the morning, dreams are very important. But dreams allow you to overcome, as Ramji said, the constraints that sometimes, animate us in our day-to-day work. And if you allow yourself, give yourself the permission to dream for a while, think how you can disrupt the status quo, you will be able to do this very often in a way that you can't imagine today. Right? So disruption is very, very important. Now tell me, all this India stack, kitna kharcha hua hoga? $1 billion? $100 million? Zero. Because all of it is no greed, no glory politics. We don't take glory. You won't hear me standing in front of the press and say the UPI protocol was made by us. Because we let the policy maker have that glory. We don't go to PhonePe and Google Pay and say, "Ab aap hame donate karo." We don't even ask for a donation from them, right? Because let them have the greed to make a better India. Is this not Indian philosophy? Right? Because you can go to many other Western countries, you will not be respected if you're no greed, no glory. But in India, you have respect because you are no greed, no glory. Is that right? Right? So this is the beauty of India. It's a very powerful place for us to dream, to disrupt, and to deliver. And my hope is that you'll be able to do this at scale. This is a room which is going to create hundreds of people who will bring these orbit shifts about because you dare to dream today. Thank you so much.